Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. Well, I only get the opportunity a couple times a year because he's the hardest working man in print journalism in America. You know, Connor, my friend, he's got a book. I cannot wait to read it. I've already had several shots at several chapters, and it's so in-depth. It's called Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. It comes out next month. You know, as you've written this book, I don't mean to laugh, but Aaron's like a story a week guy. And I keep thinking, do you have to keep doing updates for the book?
I did, actually, Colin, and thank you very much for the kind words. I handed in the book in January. And at that point, after asking to get him for months and getting no response or being told he's thinking about it, assuming at that point he's not going to talk to me. And generally, my biographies, they've been unauthorized with limited or no cooperation from the main subject. So, and then in February, I got a message from the Jets. Well, he's actually now willing to talk to you. And it wasn't going to be a 10-hour sit down where he told me his life story, but it was more a fact checking hour or two. So I got 2 hours with him, and great. So he answered some questions. He made the book better. And then after that, you had the RFK Jr. story drop. After that, you had the Sandy Hook conspiracy story drop. And then some podcasts he did after my access to him where more conspiracies were talked about. And so, listen, Aaron Rodgers, he was a very difficult subject to get your arms around. I thought Belichick was tough, but compared to Rodgers, I think Belichick was a walk in the park because he was a mystery that I felt like there was a sameness to it at the same time, and he was right in front of me. And I always felt that Rodgers was a moving target. And so it was a challenge, and hopefully I conquered it. I guess the readers will let me know if I did.
Yeah, I think, complex people are interesting. And I've said Aaron's really good content for me. Um, there are parts of Aaron that I've said on the show before. My theory on Aaron, one of them, is he just pushes back on authority. His family was very religious. He pushed back on it. He pushed back on the Packers. He's pushed back on the media. He's pushed back on the government, vaccines. Whether that's a good quality or not, it can be unsettling to people covering him. But my belief is he's a nonconformist. Many of the people in our lives, musicians and artists we have celebrated, are nonconformists. Is there a bit of artistry to his personality? That's probably the wrong word, but in my life, we have often celebrated. There's a construct of football that we want organizational, dependable, reliable personalities. And is it arguable or debatable he's more of an artist in a structured sport?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm used to Eli Manning, that model, that Eli Manning, Derek Jeter model in New York. And Aaron is the complete opposite of that. And so, but there is an art to creating a news cycle rolling out of bed, and that's what he can do. He can do that better than anyone else, maybe in all sports. He can create a news cycle like that. So, and we've seen that over the years, and I think he loves being interesting. I think he loves being talked about. He loves being analyzed. I don't think he loves the way the news media has treated him in recent years. I think his viewpoints politically generally are in contrast with what he believes is the liberal media, largely liberal media, and he's right for the most part. And you
Yeah.
look at him, though, what's interesting is his life, his public life, Colin, changed with COVID. Because before COVID and the I've been immunized press conference in August of 21, he was not considered a villain. He was a guy who was very socially aware. He backed Colin Kaepernick and the right to kneel in protest. He actually rebuked a fan who screamed out or shouted out an anti-Muslim slur in the middle of the national anthem. I think it was right after the Paris terrorist attacks, and got a letter of congratulations or thanks or appreciation from President Obama. Mina Kimes had that. And so he was sort of known as an athlete who was socially aware and engaged in the issues and really on the right side of the issues. And all of a sudden, COVID and his stance against vaccines changed everything for him in terms of his public image.
Yeah, and by the way, he wasn't the only person to do that. I don't view him as a conservative. I view him as more of a contrarian. A little bit of a Joe Rogan. Rogan's never had Trump on his podcast. He says he doesn't want him. And I think Aaron has said, about like Trump, who's the ultimate like alpha Republican, which is like he didn't drain the swamp. It's just a different swamp. So I think sometimes we view Aaron through a political prism, and I just see him as a nonconformist. And I think that stuff at some point you can trace it back to his childhood, and let's pivot to that. You wrote the book. What do we know about his childhood?
He was raised in a very conservative Christian evangelical home. And I think I talked to a family member, and of course, for the better part of 10 years, he has not had any contact with his immediate family, his parents, his two
I've been
brothers,
told
right?
that, yeah.
So I think he ultimately, and one family member told me that this person felt that when he went to Berkeley, when he went to Cal, and all of a sudden he leaves this cocoon, this small town in Northern California, overwhelmingly white, Chico, California, and is at Cal, Berkeley, this global institution, a melting pot of ideas and races and nationalities, and just got exposed to a lot of different things and beliefs, and that really inspired a rebellion against those Christian beliefs that he was raised with, and that rebellion inspired other rebellions against other things. And I had a good friend of his when he was younger say to me, we believed in magic. Aaron and I did, and together we talked about that. And when you believe in magic, you believe in the possibility of almost everything. And this person felt that opened the door to conspiracy theories too. And listen, he studied the JFK assassination as a sophomore in high school. He was fascinated by it, came to believe that was a conspiracy that involved a government agency, and that inspired other conspiracy theories as well. So I think right now, he actually told me that religion is really a small part of the estrangement. But I do think that if you go back to his childhood, certainly he now does not consider himself religious. He considers himself spiritual. But I think you see the seeds of rebellion planted in his own rebellion against those beliefs that he now does not hold.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this out, and you can latch onto this, and if there's any story in the book that corroborates or refutes this, go ahead. But I've said one of the statistics with Aaron that doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface is his lack of come from behind wins in the NFL. 21 playoff games he has won. That would be low for a bad quarterback. He's an all-time great. And I've often used, maybe it's trite, a little glib, he's more of a bailer than a baller, is that when he plays poorly early, he quits. That he's not a foxhole guy. He's just brilliantly gifted. Jeter was more of a leader. A-Rod was more talented. Brady's more of a leader. Aaron's just more talent. And that I look at him, that there's a fundamental lack of trust in a process. And when he struggles early in games, his body language shifts. When he trails late in games, there's a lack of trust for the play calling. And that's part of his personality. It's the only thing I can figure out and decipher why a gifted quarterback in 21 playoff games has only one come from behind win. Does any of this line up with some of his unique personality quirks or his fundamental base personality?
Well, when he was younger, he was a fearless postseason player. And I think he won 4 of his first 5 postseason games. And the throw he made to beat Pittsburgh in the Super Bowl, the third down throw over the middle to Jennings, is one of the great throws in Super Bowl history. on third down, if that pass is incomplete, I think the Steelers win that Super Bowl. And so he makes that play and other plays in that game. And in that postseason run, if you go back, Colin, as I did, of course, and looked at particularly the game against Atlanta in the playoffs that year that he won it, you cannot play the position at a higher level than that. He had
Right,
some
right,
Allen Iverson type ankle breaking moves to escape guys in the pocket that were just unbelievable. And the throws he made and just the way he played in that game, it was art. It was just hard to believe somebody could play at that level. And after watching that game and seeing him win the Super Bowl, it is really hard still after studying his career and his life to come to grips with the fact that the Packers could not figure out a way to win a second ring with this guy. It's just unbelievable. One
right.
thing I'll point out, so this doesn't really relate to his upbringing or character traits, but listen, if they recover an onside kick, he's in the second Super Bowl. They don't recover an onside kick and didn't do six other things in the final minutes of that game. And by the way, that comeback drive to tie and send it into overtime against Seattle is totally forgotten. Was an amazing drive by Aaron Rodgers to get that game into overtime after the team and really the coaching staff around him fell apart. So that doesn't count because they lost. But just in that building, the loudest building in the NFL, after the rest of the team really folded around him to drive that team down the field to force overtime and lose it basically on a coin toss. So that's a tough one because they get to the Super Bowl that year. They had beaten New England in the regular season, so they would have a lot of confidence against Brady in the Super Bowl that year. But he did not have Belichick. Okay, Mike McCarthy was not a bad coach, but he's not even close to Belichick.
Yeah,
Tom Brady also had the best offensive coordinator of his generation. And Brady had this great system that Belichick created. And Aaron
right.
Rodgers had a slightly better than average head coach and didn't have that system or offensive coordinator. A lot of times didn't have a great defense. And so I think that's that. Hey, it's there. And it's part of his legacy. The lack of comeback victory certainly is right there on his record. But he very easily, in a different situation, would have the multiple rings that he doesn't have right now that everybody holds against him. And he has a part in that too. There were postseason victories that he left on the field that he could have made a play to overcome somebody else, and he didn't do that. And certainly that is part of his record as well.
So it's 2024, and let's talk about something really, really important. If you're ever injured, check out Morgan and Morgan. It's America's largest injury law firm, and they are there for you. Over 100 offices nationwide. Think about that. More than 1,000 lawyers with over 20 billion, that's a B, $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients. Things happen in life unexpectedly. Submitting an injury claim with Morgan and Morgan is really, really easy. Like winning in the NFL is hard. We know that quarterbacking in the NFL is hard. Submitting a claim is easy. You're ever injured? Check out Morgan and Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound law from your cell phone. Morgan and Morgan has a proven track record of fighting for you to get a full and fair compensation if there's an unexpected accident in your life. And I've had a few. Yeah, I think he's been fairly portrayed as a quarterback, as Marino level gifted. We're wanting more postseason success. A little prickly personally and different, but an all-time great. And I think that's incredibly fair. I always preferred him over Favre. I thought he could play in structure and out of it, whereas I thought Brett was harder to coach and a little bit more of an old style gunslinger, where Aaron could do a little bit of that, but also played in structure very, very well. I don't think he's been unfairly criticized. I do think, like a Joe Rogan, when you're a news maker, the media are filled full of human beings. They tend to take sides. There does feel like a little bit of a negative pivot off Aaron. Do you think he will often say it doesn't affect him? Do you think it's had a corrosive effect on his personality and some of his actions?
I think so. I think that's a fair way to look at it, Colin. And listen, he's brought a lot of this on himself. And I think he's for a guy as smart as he is, a guy who had 1310 on his SATs and is very thoughtful and engaging and can talk about so many different things. He's intellectually curious. And I've always thought he's one of the best, if not the best, interviews in the league.
Yeah.
He's a
Yeah.
great talker. And but he has said some things that he's had to take back. And I think, like, for instance, the Jimmy Kimmel thing on McAfee,
Yeah.
right? So he did not
Yeah.
go on the program that day planning to talk about Epstein and Jimmy Kimmel and the Epstein list, but AJ Hawk, one of his good friends, blurted it out, a question, and obviously that show is very free flowing, and McAfee does a great job with it. But
Yeah.
and it's the way he responded to AJ Hawk off the cuff on the fly that got him in trouble. And I think he was very careless with his words. I actually believe he was not trying to say that he thought Kimmel was on the list. I think he's always been waiting for an opportunity to get back at Kimmel for making fun of him previously on his show regarding Aaron's belief, or he suggested that all of a sudden we're getting all this information out of the government about UFOs to divert attention away from the Epstein list. And Kimmel
Right.
mocked him for that. So he was trying to get back at him. But the way he said it, if you didn't know the context and the background, you would believe that Aaron Rodgers was suggesting that Jimmy Kimmel was going to be on that list. And of course he wasn't. So he put himself in that position. He got himself in trouble. And it was just, once you try to explain it days later, as he tried to do, you've lost. You know that. Once you have to explain
Yeah.
something like that, you've already lost. And so there are cases like that in his career that are dumbfounding because he is a very intelligent guy. And so I'd say that he has brought a fair amount of that on himself.
The book is called Out of the Darkness: The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers, comes out next month. Um, what part of the book was the most interesting for you? There's his grandfather, there's his parents, there's his childhood, there's Berkeley, there's Green Bay, there's sitting behind Favre, there's taking over for Favre, there's the prime years, there's the departure, the exit from Green Bay. Was there a part of the book that there were surprises, there were left turns that you really found, as you were compiling the information and writing it, it was easy to write, you really enjoyed it?
At the chapter on Butte Community College, his 1 year at JUCO ball
Oh,
was
it's
a blast.
great.
Yeah,
It's
I
great.
loved it. His coach Craig Rigsby is the Charles Barkley of JUCO coaches. The guys, he was a great talker,
Great
great
chapter.
character. Thank you. And so, but I would say the story that I really actually enjoyed researching and reporting on the most was about his grandfather, because I had heard in passing, and occasionally you'd see it briefly mentioned in a story that his grandfather served in World War II, and that was pretty much the extent of it. You might see an occasional reference to the fact that he was a POW. And so, in finding, there's a guy in Minneapolis named Dan Matthews, who's a military records expert, and this guy was gold. And he found a lot of this for me. I found some of it as well, but documenting every mission that Edward Rogers flew as a B-24 combat pilot,
Wow.
and including one on St. Patrick's Day in 1944, where his plane was hit multiple times. His engine on the left side, one of the four engines, is on fire. He's flying over Nazi Germany, and the rest of his squadron, they weren't abandoning him, but it was protocol as part of their mission. They had to peel off and go to the next stage of the mission. And he was all alone on fire over Germany in a B-24 that he was flying with 10 men aboard, and he had to make decisions. And he said, I felt like the loneliest man in the world flying over
Yeah.
Nazi Germany. And so the story is he somehow flew that plane back to the American base in Italy. They got down safely. So effectively, he saved 11 lives, including his own. And I wanted to open the book with that chapter because there's so much
Yeah.
negativity about his family that I wanted to actually write a positive story about his family. And his grandfather was an amazing combat pilot who flew 44 missions, 43 of them successful against Hitler's war machine, shot down on the 44th, was beaten and mistreated as a POW, told war crimes investigators of his mistreatment. And we have all of that in the book. And I think that actually was my favorite chapter.
Yeah, it's by the way, it is such an impressive feat of reporting. Um, I was a bit in awe of you reading that chapter. I sometimes, Walter Isaacson will do this, you will do
I'm
this.
not,
Um,
don't mention me in the same sentence with him, but thank you.
I've sometimes you guys that write these books, you just go a mile deep, and I'm jealous of not only the time you have to do it, but your ability to find it, bring it to light, and tell it artfully. I just think it's so fascinating. Now, I always thought there was such a unique, interesting contrast between this great-looking hipster that went to Berkeley that ends up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the smallest, talking about the loneliest places in the NFL. Do you think, Aaron, on a social level, what was Green Bay like for him? That's always been fascinating. I know he goes to Malibu in the offseason, but for about 20 weeks, you live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Did you think he liked it, appreciated
He
it?
did. And it's funny because after he got drafted, of course, he's very disappointed that he plunged in the first round. He was supposed to, or a lot of people thought he should have gone number one to his childhood team, San Francisco. That was his dream. The Niners picked Alex Smith instead. So he falls to 24 to Green
Yep.
Bay. And Thomas Weatherspoon, former NCAA champion sprinter, was a trainer for Aaron Rodgers, a guy who made him faster. And he said to him, "This is great. This is like Chico with snow." Green Bay, and they Green Bay quarterbacks in Green Bay, they're going to build a statue for you, and they're going to love you to death. And there's no better place to be. So this plunge in the first round is really a blessing in disguise. And I think Aaron saw that. And now I don't think the Green Bay community embraced him like it embraced Brett Favre because they saw Favre as one of us, even though he was from the South, right?
Yes.
Hunter,
Yes.
fisherman, hanging out with the boys in the bar, high-fiving fans over a beer, buy everyone a round in the bar until, of course, he went into until he got sober, and then that changed a little bit. But yeah, Favre, they saw he is one of us, and I don't think they ever saw Rodgers as one of us. But I think it was a really good fit for him, coming from a small market, being overlooked, coming a JUCO guy, and then he ends up in Green Bay, and it really was a great marriage, even though it wasn't the same relationship with the fans that Favre had. And I just can't believe that they only won one championship with him. When you look at the talent, and some of it is his fault, but it's a shame. And really, at the end for John Elway, he got a second ring. He got his first ring and a second ring at the end of his career. And Peyton Manning got that second ring right at the end of his career. And I think that it would be a good thing, really, to see Aaron Rodgers get that second ring before he retires, because he's too good to retire with one ring.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's got one and not zero, because we'd be really destroying him for that. So, but he
Right.
really should retire with multiple rings. And hey, listen, the Jet fan base is the most fatalistic fan base I've ever encountered. And at some point, it's going to happen. Entering the 2004 season, the Red Sox fan base thought it would never happen, and it did. Entering 2016, the Cubs fan base thought it would never happen, and it did. The New York Ranger fan base in 94 thought it would never happen, and it did. So at some point, it will happen for the Jets. Hopefully, it'll be this year.
So when you gave me the early to middle chapters of the book, and it's the kind of stuff, folks, you just pick a weekend when it's raining in the fall and sit and read. It's just easy to devour. I did not get the final chapters. Is there much in it about the Jets? It's a very brief part of his career. And if anything is there, the relationship with Saleh, two good-looking young guys, appeared to be very strong early. I wonder if it's as strong today.
I don't think it is. He didn't say that. So I want to make that clear. I did talk to him about the Jets, the experience. I do have a lot on the Jets in the book. Of course, that's at the end of the book. And I think that when they met that 5 hour meeting, when the Jets sent that delegation out to Malibu to try to convince him to force the trade to New York, he spent most of his time with Saleh in that meeting. Everybody else was sort of hanging out on the backyard deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean, but I think he still has he always had a good relationship with Saleh. I still think it's strong, but they all know they're getting fired if they don't make the playoffs this year. And I think Aaron certainly has to question this guy's ability as a head coach. I think he's a great guy, and I think he is a guy. If I were an owner of an NFL team, I would want to employ him. But as a defensive coordinator, he has not proven that he can be a good head coach. He hasn't done it, so Aaron knows
Right.
that. So I think he still likes him, still has maybe some belief in him, not as much as when he signed on. But yeah, this book has a lot of Jet material in it, particularly how the play unfolded, where he got hurt. It shouldn't have happened. I explain why he talks in detail about that play in ways that
Wow.
listen, Garrett Wilson was open. And so obviously
Yeah.
the cut block technique, I think the Athletic had a story about how Aaron has never liked cut blocking, and I talked to him about that. And Dwayne Brown missed the cut block on Leonard Floyd. That creates an opportunity. And it really was an amazing night being in the building. I've never experienced a more charged regular season crowd, not just for the Jets, in my almost 40 years of covering sports in New York, any team. I mean, that night, that crowd was unbelievable. And to see it taken away 4 snaps in like that, it was hard. It was hard to take. I was getting text messages from friends. Oh, I feel terrible. Your book is dead. And I didn't care about my book. I felt heartsick for the fans and for him to
Yeah.
be there in that moment.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
did I. Yeah. I remember the next day after that, I went on the air and people knew I was critical of Aaron. And I had several reach out to me. And because I went on the air and I said, I feel so bad for Aaron Rodgers. I felt sick to my stomach. I'd never root against a player, root for a player getting hurt. But I think Aaron has been a content machine for what I do, and I do appreciate that. And he made some points on the vaccines that he may be right. I tended to get in line with the government. Maybe I was wrong and gullible. I don't know.
Well, me
But
too. And I told him
the
that.
book is
Yeah.
coming out.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I could be wrong.
yeah,
Yeah,
I was open minded, and I told him I have zero agenda with this book. I have no agenda whatsoever. I didn't have any real negative thoughts when you arrived in New York about you. And it's funny because I had more trouble convincing people of that they assumed I was a liberal media guy with an agenda. And I think over time, they realized I wasn't. And I was just trying to document a significant American life. But I had more trouble convincing people to talk than I did with my Belichick book. And that was a surprising part of it. How many people were afraid to talk about Aaron Rodgers? And I think I won that battle over time, but it was a battle to get there. And so,
yeah,
but yeah, it was. Listen, I have a good feeling about this Jets team, and I know you've been a critic. I think you've been fair on Rodgers. Your criticism to me is fair game. I would like to look at the all-time list, and I think you have him a little lower than I have him. I have him fifth. And the way I try to do it is very subjective, of course, but try to make it more objective. And my formula is to take regular season MVPs plus Super Bowl MVPs. So it's a team sport, but if you are the best player in the league, and then how many times are you the best player in the biggest game in American sports? Put the two together and come up with a number. And that's why I have Aaron Rodgers in my top five. I have him fifth. But I think obviously Mark Schlereth said he belongs at the kids' table when it comes to at a gathering of all-time quarterbacks. I think he's the last seat at the main table, but I think he belongs at the main table.
yeah. I've always put him in the Marino class, where I think he and Marino throw the prettiest ball. I want more. I'm left hungry after their football careers, but it's indisputable that they're iconic. They're brilliant. Um, I'm more critical, although I don't talk of him with Marino, because I think Marino had the first or second best coach for his entire career, and Aaron didn't. Also, Dan Marino had an owner, and that helps in free agency. Aaron Rodgers didn't. So I think at some point I will go down. I will probably have him closer to 8 or 9. Marino in that same thing. Elway won the big games. Marino didn't win as many. But I think we both believe he's an all-time talent. I've always had him ahead of Favre. But I do think he needs to. Favre had a very a really remarkable year, 33 touchdowns, 7 picks that first year in Minnesota. Then he got injured. That was, I mean, that in my opinion, that was one of the great years by an aging quarterback ever. Maybe the greatest year by an aging quarterback. If Aaron sputters here this year, after last year, and kind of a weak year in Green Bay at the end, I don't think it's not, we forgot Jordan was so good, we forget about Washington. I mean, it's like the footage has disappeared. I do think Aaron needs to be, we have to see some magic. It's a nice way. It's icing on a very good cake. And I kind of project they're an 8-9 win team. I don't see 12-13, but I don't blame Aaron. I think the coaching and the coordinating leaves a little to be desired.